Chapter 9 The Voyage of Mrs. Weasley. Dumbledore's abrupt departure took Harry completely by surprise. He remained sitting where he was in the chair, struggling with his feeling of shock and relief. The Wizards were all getting to their feet, talking and gathering up their papers and packing them away. Harry stood up. Nobody seemed to be paying him the slightest bit of attention, expecting the toad-like witch of Fudge Right, who was now gazing down at him instead of a Dumbledore. Ignoring her, he tried to catch Fudge's eyes on Madame Bones, wanting to ask whether he was free to go, but Fudge seemed quite determined not to notice Harry, and Madame Bones was busy with her briefcase. So he took a few tentative steps forward the exit, and when nobody called him back, broke into a very fast walk. He took the first few steps at a run, wrenched open the door, and almost collided with Mr. Weasley, who was standing right outside looking pale and apprehensive. Dumbledore didn't say, "Clear," Harry said, pulling the door closed behind him of all charges. Beaming, Mr. Weasley seized Harry by the shoulder. "Harry, that's wonderful. Well, of course, they couldn't have found you guilty, not on the evidence, but even so, I can't pretend I wasn't." But Mr. Weasley broke off because the courtroom door had just opened again. The Wiscoms were filling out. "Marlene Braid," said Mr. Weasley, wondering, pulling Harry aside to let them all pass. "You were tried by the full court." "I think so," said Harry quietly. One or two of them passing wizards nodded to Harry as they passed, and few, including Madame Bones, said "Morning, Arthur" to Mr. Weasley, but most averted their eyes. Cornelius Fudge and Toad-like Witch were almost the last to leave the Dagon. Fudge acted as though Mr. Weasley and Harry were apart from the all. But again, the witch looked almost apprehensively at Harry as she passed. Last of all to pass was Percy. Like Fudge, he completely ignored his father and Harry. He marched past clutching a large roll of parchment and a handful of spare quill, his back rigid and his nose in the air. The line around Mr. Weasley's mouth tightened slightly, but other than this, he gave a sign that he had noticed his third son. "I'm going to take you straight back so you can tell the others the good news," he said, beckoning Harry forward as Percy's heels disappeared up the stair to the ninth level. "I'll drop you off on the way to the toilet in Bethnal Green. Come on." "So what will you have to do about the toilet?" Harry asked, grinning. Everything suddenly seemed 5 times funnier than usual. It was starting to sink in. He was clear he was going back to Hogwarts. "Oh, it's simple enough," Auntie Jinx said Mr. Weasley as they mounted the stairs, "but it's not so much having to repair the damage. It's more the attitude behind the vandalism." Harry Muggle-batting said, striking some wizard as funny, "but it's an expression of something but much nastier, and I, for one—" Mr. Weasley broke off in mid-sentence. They had just reached in ninth level corridor, and Cornelius Fudge was standing 5 feet away from them, talking quietly to a tall man with a sleek blonde hair and a pointed pale face. The second man turned at the sound of the footstep. He took broke off in mid-conversation. His cold grey eyes narrowed and fixed upon Harry's face. "Well, well, well, Patronus Potter," said Lucius Malfoy coldly. Harry felt widened as though he had just walked into something heavy. He had last seen those cold grey eyes through slit in Death Eater's hood, and last heard that man's voice jeering in the dark graveyard while Lord Voldemort tortured him. He could not believe that Lucius Malfoy dared look him in the face. He could not believe that he was here in the Ministry of Magic, or that Cornelius Fudge was talking to him. When Harry had told Fudge mere weeks ago that Malfoy was a Death Eater, "The Ministry was just telling me about your luck escape, Potter," drawled Mr. Malfoy. "Quite astonishing way you continue to wriggle out of very tight hole, snack-like. In fact, Mr. Weasley gripped Harry's shoulder in warning. Yeah, said Harry. Yeah, I'm good. Escaping Lucius Malfoy raised his eyes to Mr. Weasley's face, and Arthur Weasley too. What are you doing here, Arthur? I work here, said Mr. Weasley shortly. Not here, surely, said Mr. Malfoy, raising his eyebrow and glancing toward the door over Mr. Weasley's shoulder. I thought you were up to the second floor. Don't you do something that involves seeking Muggle artifacts home and bewitching them? No, said Mr. Weasley curtly, his fingers now biting into Harry's shoulder. What are you doing here anyway? Harry asked Lucius Malfoy. I don't think private matter between myself and Ministry are any concern of yours, Potter, said Malfoy, soothing the front of his robes. Harry distinctly heard the gentle clicking of what sounded like full pocket of gold. Really, just because you are Dumbledore's favorite boy, you must not accept same indulgence from the rest of us. Shall we go up to your office then, Minister? Certainly, said First, turning his back to Harry and Mr. Weasley. This way, Lucius. They struck off together, talking in a low voice. Mr. Weasley did not let go of Harry's shoulder until they had disappeared into their lift. Why wasn't he waiting outside for office if they have got business to do rather? Harry burst out furiously. What was he doing down here, trying to sneak down to the courtroom? If you ask me, said Mr. Weasley, looking extremely agitated as he glanced over his shoulder as though making sure they could not be overheard, trying to find out whether you had been expelled or not. I'll leave a note for Dumbledore when I drop you off. He ought to know Malfoy been talking to Fudge again. What private business have they got together anyway? Gold, I accept, said Mr. Weasley angrily. Malfoy has been giving generous to all sort of things for years. Get him in with the right people. Then he can ask favor. Delay law he doesn't want passed. Oh, he's very well connected, Lucius Malfoy. The lift arrived. It was empty except for a flock of memos that flapped around Mr. Weasley's head as he pressed the button for the atrium and the door changed shut. He waved them anyway, irritable. Mr. Weasley, said Harry slowly, if Fudge is meeting Death Eater like Malfoy, if he is seeing them alone, how do we know they haven't put the Emperor's curse on him? Don't think it hadn't occurred to us, Harry, said Mr. Weasley, but Dumbledore thinks Fudge is acting of his own accord at the moment, which was Dumbledore say is not a lot of comfort. Best not talk about it anymore just now, Harry. The door slid open and they stepped out into the now almost deserted atrium. Eric, in the security man, was hiding behind the Daily Prophet again. They had walked straight past the golden fountain before Harry remembered. Wait, he told Mr. Weasley, and pulling his money bag from his pocket, he turned back to the fountain. He looked up into the handsome wizard's face, but up closely, Harry thought he looked rather weak and foolish. The witch was wearing a vapid smile like a beauty contestant, and from what Harry knew of goblins and centaurs, they were mostly unlikely to be caught staring this softly and humans of any description. Only the house elf's attitude of creeping servantly looked convincing, with a grin at the thought of what Hermione could say if she could see the statue of Elf. Harry turned his money bag upside down and emptied not just 10 gallons, but the whole content into the pool at the starter's feet. He knew it, yelled Ron, punching the ear. You always get away with this stuff. They were born to clear you, said Hermione, who had looked positively faint with anxiety when Harry had entered the kitchen and was now holding a shaking hand over her eyes. There was no case against you, none at all. Everyone seemed quite relieved, though, considering they all knew it had get off, said Harry, smiling. Mrs. Weasley was wiping her face on her apron, and Fred, George, and Ginny were doing a kind of war dance to chart that went he go off, he go off, he go off. That's enough, settle down, shouted Mr. Weasley, though he too was smiling. Listen, Cyrus, Lucius Malfoy was at the ministry. What? Said Cyrus sharply. He got off, he got off, he got off. Be quiet, you there. Yes, we saw him talking to Fudge on level 9. Then they went up the first office together, Dumbledore out to know. Absolutely, said Cyrus. We'll tell him, don't worry. Well, I'd rather get going there. A vomiting toilet in Bethel Green waiting for me. Molly, I'll be late. I'm converting for tongs, but Kingsley might be dropping in for dinner. He got off, he got off, he got off. That's enough, Fred, George, Guinea, said Mrs. Weasley, and Mr. Weasley left the kitchen. Harry dear, come and sit, have some lunch. You hardly ate breakfast. Ron and Hermione sat themselves down opposite him, looking happier than they had done since he had first arrived at number 12 Grimmauld Place, and Harry's feeling of giddy relief, which was being somewhat detented by his encounter with Lucius Malfoy, swelled again. The gloomy house seemed warmer and more welcoming. All of a sudden, even Creature looked less ugly as they poked his sound-like nose into the kitchen to investigate the source of all the noise. Of course, once Dumbledore turned up on your side, there was on way they were going to convict you, said Ron happily, now dishing great mold of mashed potatoes into everyone's plate. Yes, he swung it for me, said Harry. He felt that it would sound highly ungrateful, not to mention childish, to say, I wish he had talked to me, though, or even looked at me. And as he thought this, the scar on his forehead burned so badly that he clapped on his hand to it. What's up? Said Hermione, looking alarmed. Scar? Harry mumbled, but it's nothing. It happened all the time now. None of these other had noticed a thing. All of them were now helping themselves to food while gloating over Harry's narrow escape. Fred, George, and Ginny were sitting still singing. Hermione looked rather anxious, but before she could say anything, Ron said happily, I bet Dumbledore turned up this evening to celebrate with us. You know, I don't think he'll be able to, Ron, said Mrs. Weasley, sitting a huge plate of toast chicken down in front of Harry. He is really very busy at the moment. He got off, he got off, he got off. Shut up, roared Mrs. Weasley. Over the next few days, Harry could not help noticing that there was one person within themselves, 12 Grimmauld Place, who did not seem wholly overjoyed that they would be returning to Hogwarts. Cyrus had put up a very good show of happiness of first hearing the news, wringing Harry's hand and beaming like the rest of them. Soon, however, he was morelier and surely than before, taking less to everybody, even Harry, and spending increasing amount of time shut up his mother's room with Buckbeak. Don't you go feeling guilty, said Hermione sternly, after Harry had confided some of his feeling to her and Ron while they scrubbed out a motley cupboard on the third floor a few days later. You belong at Hogwarts and Cyrus knows it. Personally, I think he's being selfish. That's a bit harsh, Hermione said Ron, frowning as he attempted to prise off a bit of mold that had attached itself firmly to his finger. You wouldn't want to stuck inside this house without company. He'll have company, said Hermione. It's headquartered to the Order of the Phoenix, isn't it? He just got his hope up that Harry will be coming to live here with him. I don't think that's true, said Harry, wringing out his cloth. We wouldn't give me a straight answer when I asked him if I could. He Just didn't want to get his own hopes up even worse, said Hermione Weasley, and he probably felt a bit guilty himself because I think a part of him was really hoping you had be expelled. Then you had both be outcast together. Some of it, said Harry and Ron together, but Hermione merely struggled. Suit yourself, but I'm something. Think Ron's mom's right, said Cyrus get confused about whether are you or your father, Harry. So you think he's touched in his head, said Harry heatedly. No, I just think he's been very lonely for a long time, said Hermione simply. At this point, Mrs. Weasley entered the bedroom behind them, still not finishing. She said, poking her head into the cupboard, I thought you might be here to tell us to have a break, said Ron bitterly. Do you know how much more we have got rid of since we arrived here? You were too keen to help the order, said Mrs. Weasley. You can do your bit by making headquarters fit to live in. I feel like a house elf grumbling alone. Well, now that you understand what dreadful lives they had, perhaps you'll be a bit more active in SPW, said Hermione hopefully as Mrs. Weasley left them to eat again. You know, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to show people exactly how horrible it is to clean all the time. We could do a sponsor scrub or Gryffindor common room all proceed to SPEW. It would raise awareness as well as fun. I'll sponsor you to shut up about spew. Ron muttered irritably, but only so Harry could hear him. Harry found himself daydreaming about Hogwarts more and more at the end of holiday approach. He could not wait to see Hagrid again, to play Quidditch, even to stroll across the vegetable patch of herbology greenhouse. It would be treat just to leave his dusty, musty house where half of the cupboard are still bloated shut and creature whizzing insult out of the shadow as you pass. Though Harry was careful not to say any of this with earshot of Cyrus. The fact was that living at the headquarters of the anti-Voldemort movement was not nearly as interesting or exciting as Harry would have expected before he had experienced it. Though a member of the Order of Phoenix came and went regularly, sometimes staying for meal, sometimes only for a few minutes whispered conversation, Mrs. Weasley made sure that Harry and Arthur were kept well out of earshot, whether extendable or normal, and nobody, not even Cyrus, seemed to feel that Harry needed to knowing anything more than he had heard on the night of his arrival. On the very last day of the holiday, Harry was sweeping up Hedwig's owl dropping from the top of Weirdrop where Ron entered their bedroom carrying a couple of envelopes. Book lists have arrived, he said, throwing one of the envelopes out to Harry, who was standing on chair about time. I thought they have forgotten they usually come much earlier than this. Harry swept the last of the dropping into rubbish bag and threw the bag over Ron's head into the waste paper basket in the corner and swallowed it and blinked loudly. He then opened his letter. It contained two pieces of parchment, one the usual reminder that turn started on 1st of September, the other telling him which book he would need the coming year. Only two new books, he said, reading the first, the standard book of spell grade 5 by Miranda Goshawk and Defensive Magical Theory by Wilbur Sinkard. Fred and George operated right beside Harry. He was so used to them doing this by now that he didn't even fall off his chair. We were just wondering who assigned the Slinkhart's book, said Fred conversationally, because it meant Dumbledore's found a new defense against the dark art teacher, said George. And about time too, said Fred. What do you mean? Harry asked, jumping down beside them. Well, we've all heard Mom and Dad talking on the extendable years. A few weeks back, Fred told Harry, and from what they were saying, Dumbledore was having real trouble finding anyone to do the job this year. Not surprising, is it, when you look at what happened to the last four, said George. One sacked, one dead, one's memory removed, and one locked in a trunk for 9 months, said Harry, counting them off to his finger. Yeah, I see. What do you mean? What's up with Ron? Asked Fred. Ron did not answer. Harry looked around. Ron was standing very still with his mouth still open, gaping at his letter from Hogwarts. What's the matter? Said Fred impatiently, moving around Ron to look over his shoulder at the parchments. Fred's mouth fell open too. Perfect, he said, staring incredulously at the letter. Perfect. George leaped forward, seized the envelope in Ron's other hand, and turned it upside down. Harry saw something scarlet and gold fall into George's palm. No way, said George in an hushed voice. There's been mistakes, said Fred, snatching the letter out of Ron's grasp and holding it up light as though checking for the watermark. No one in their right mind would make Ron a perfect. The twin had turned in uncertain, and both of them stared at Harry. Thought you were a cert, said Fred in a tone that suggests Harry had tricked them in some way. We thought Dumbledore was bound to pick you, said George indignantly. Winning the Triwizard and everything, said Fred. I suppose all the bad stuff must have counted against him, said George to Fred. Yeah, said Fred slowly. Yeah, you have caused too much trouble, mate. Well, at least one of you got their priorities right. He strode over to Harry and clapped him on the back while giving Ron a snatching look. Perfect, equally, Ronnie said perfect. The mom's going to be rewarded, God George, trusting the perfect badge back at Ron's as though it might contaminate him. Ron, who still had not said a word, took a badge, stared at it for a moment, and then held it out to Harry as though asking mutely for confirmation that it was genuine. Harry took it. A large P was superimposed on the Gryffindor's lion. He had seen a badge just like this of Percy's chest on this very first day at Hogwarts. The door banged open. Hermione came tearing into the room, her cheek flushed, her hair flying. There was an envelope in her hand. Did you get? She spotted the badge in Harry's hand and let out the shriek. I knew it, she said excitedly, brandishing her letter. Me too, Harry, me too. No, said Harry quickly, pushing the badge back into Ron's hand. It's Ron, not me. It what? Ron's perfect. Me, Harry said. Ron, said Hermione in her jaw dropping. But are you sure? I mean, she turned red on Ron's, looking around at her with defiant expression on his face. To my name on the letter, he said. I said Hermione, looking thoroughly bewildered. I, well, wow. Well done, Ron. That's really unexpected, said George, nodding. No, said Hermione, blushing harder than ever. No, it's not. Ron done lots of. He's really. The door behind her opened a little wide, and Mrs. Weasley back into the room, carrying a pile of fresh laundered robes. Ginny said the book list had come at last, she said, glancing around at all the envelopes as she made her way over to bed and started sorting the robes into two piles. If you get them to me, I'll take them over Diagon Alley this afternoon and get your books while you're packing. Ron, I'll have to get you more pajamas. These are the least 6 inches too short. I can't believe how fast you are growing. What color would you like? Get him red and golden to match his badge, said George, smirking. Match his what? Said Mrs. Weasley, absently rolling up a pair of maroon socks and placing them into Ron's pile. His badge. said Fred, with the air of getting the worst over quickly. His lovely, shiny, new perfect badge. Fred's words took a moment to penetrate Mrs. Weasley's preoccupation about pajamas. His, but Ron, you're not. Ron held up his badge. Mrs. Weasley let out a shriek just like Hermione's. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Oh, Ron, how wonderful. A perfect. That's everyone in the family. What are Fred and I, next door neighbors? Said George indigently as his mother pushed him aside and flung her arm around her youngest son. Wait until your father's here. Ron, I'm so proud of you. What wonderful news. You could end up head boy just like Bill and Percy. It's the first step. Oh, what a thing to happen in the middle of all this worry. I'm just thrilled. Oh, Ronnie. Fred and George were both making loud, retching noise behind her back, but Mrs. Weasley did not notice. Arms tied around Ron's neck, she was kissing him all over his face, which had turned a brighter scarlet than his badge. Mom, don't! Mom, get a grip! He muttered, trying to push her away. She let go of him and said breathlessly, well, what will it be? We gave Percy an owl, but you have already got one. Of course. What do you mean? Said Ron, looking at though he did not dare believe his ear. You have got to have a reward for this, said Mrs. Weasley fondly. How about a nice new set of dress robes? We have already brought him some, said Fred sorely. It looked as though he sincerely regretted his generosity. Or a new cauldron, Charlie's one old ones rusting through a new rat. You always like Scabber. Mum, said Ron hopefully, can I have a new broom? Mrs. Weasley's face fell slightly. Broomstick very expensive, not really good one. Ron hesitated to add just a new one for change. Mrs. Weasley hesitated, then smiled. Of course you can. Well, I had better get going if I have get a broom to buy too. I'll see you all later, little Ronnie. A perfect. And don't forget to pack your trunk. A perfect. Oh, I'm all of you, tighter. She gave Ron yet another kiss on cheek, sniffed loudly, and bustled from the room. Fred and George exchanged look. You don't mind if we go, don't kiss you, do you, Ron? And said Fred in a fastly anxious voice. We could cursely if you like, said George. Oh, shut up, said Ron, scowling at them. Or what? Said Fred, an evil grin spreading across his face. Going to put us in detention. I have loved to see him try, sniggering George. He could if you don't want out, said Hermione angrily, at which Fred and George burst out laughing, and Ron muttered, drop it, Hermione, we are going to have watch our steps, George, said Fred, pretending to tremble with these two on our case. Yeah, it looked like our law-breaking days are finally over, said George, shaking his head, and with another loud crack, the twink disappeared. Those two, said Harmony furiously, staring at the ceiling through which they could now hear Fred and George roaring with laughter in the room upstairs. Don't pay any attention to them, Ron. They are only jealous. I don't think they are, said Ron doubtfully, also looking up at the ceiling. They have always said only prats become perfect. Still, he added on a happier note, they have never had new broom. I wish I could go with Mom and choose. She'll never be able to afford a new bus, but there is new cleanse wave out. That's be great. Yeah, I think I'll go and tell her I like cleanse wave, just so she knows. He dashed from the room, leaving Harry and Hermione. For some reason, Harry found that he did not want to look at her. He returned to his bed, picked up a pile of clean robes Mrs. Weasley had slid upon it, and crossed the room to his trunk. Harry, said Hermione tentatively. Well done, said Harry, so heartily it did not sound like his voice at all. And still, not looking at her, brilliant, perfect. Thanks, perfect is something they can understand. Yeah, no problem, said Harry, still in a horrible, heavy voice. I did not belong to him. Take her. He leaned over his trunk, lied in his robe on the bottom of it, and pretended to be rummaging for something while Hermione crossed through the wardrobe and called Hedwig down. A few moments passed. Harry heard the door close, but remained bent, double listening. The only sound he could hear the blank picture on the bell snapping again and the waste paper basket in the corner, coughing up the owl dropping. He straightened up and looked behind him. Hermione and Hedwig had gone. Harry returned slowly to his bed and sank onto it, gazing unseeingly at the foot of wardrobe. He had forgotten completely about perfect being chosen in the fifth year. He had been too anxious about the possibility of being expelled to spare a thought of the fact that Batch must be winning their way towards certain people. But if he had remembered, if he had thought about it, would he had expected? Not this, said a small and truthful voice inside him. His head. Harry screwed up his face and buried it in his hand. He could not lie to himself. If he had known the perfect badge was on its way, it would have expected it to come to him, not Ron. Did this make him as arrogant as Draco Malfoy? Did he think himself superior to everyone else? Did he really believe he was better than Ron? No, said the small voice definitely. Was that true? Harry wondered anxiously, probing his own feeling. I'm better at which said the voice, but I'm not better at anything else. That was definitely true. Harry thought he was no better than Ron in lesson, but what about outside lesson? About those adventures he, Ron, and Hermione had together since they started at Hogwarts, often risking much worse than explosion. Well, Ron and Hermione were with me most of the time, said the voice in Harry's head. Not all the time, though. Harry argued with himself. They didn't fight, quarrel with me. They didn't take a riddle and a basilisk. They didn't get rid of all those dementors the night Cyrus escaped. They weren't in the graveyard with me the night Voldemort returned. The same feeling of ill usage had overwhelmed him on a night he had arrived rose again. I have definitely done more. Harry thought indulgently. I have done more than either of them. But maybe, said small voice fairly, maybe Dumbledore doesn't choose perfect because they have got themselves into lots of dangerous situations. Maybe he chooses them for other reason. Ron must have something you don't. Harry opened his eyes and stared through his finger at the wardrobe claw's feet, remembering what Fred had said. No one in their right mind would make Ron's a perfect. Harry gave a small snort of laughter. A second later, he felt sinking with himself. Ron had not asked Dumbledore to give him a perfect badge. This was not Ron's fault. Was he, Harry, Ron's best friend in the world, going to sulk because he didn't have a badge? Laugh with the twins behind Ron's back. Ruin this for Ron when, for the first time, he had beaten Harry to something. At this point, Harry heard Ron's footsteps on the street again. He stood up, straightening his glasses, and his grin onto his face as Ron bounded back through the door. Just caught her, said happily. She says she'll get a clean sweep if she can. Cool, he said, and he was relieved to hear that voice had stopped sounding hurtly. Listen, Ron, well done, mate. The smile faded off Ron's face. I never thought it would be me, said, shaking his head. I thought it would be you. I have caused too much trouble, Harry said, echoing Fred. Yeah, said Ron. Yeah, I suppose. Well, we had better get our trunk packed, hadn't we? It was odd how widely their possessions seemed to have scattered themselves since they had arrived. It took them most of the afternoon to retrieve their books and belongings from all over the house and stow them back inside their school trunk. Harry noticed that Ron kept moving his perfect badge around first placing it on his beside table, then putting it in his jeans pocket, then taking it out of lying it on his folded robes, as though to see the effect of the red on the black. Only when Fred and George dropped in and offered to attach it to her forehead with a parchment seeking charm did he wrapped her tenderly with maroon socks and looked in his trunk. Mrs. Weasley returned from Diagon Alley around 6 o'clock, landed with books and carrying a long pack wrapped in thick brown paper, and Ron took for her with a moan of longing. Never mind unwrapping it now. People are arriving for dinner. I want you all downstairs, she said, but the moment she was outside, Ron ripped off the paper in frenzy and examined every inch of new broom, an ecstatic expression on his face. Down in the basement, Mrs. Weasley had hung an scarlet banner over the heavily landed dinner label, which read, "Congratulations, Ron and Hermione, new perfect." She looked in a better mood than Harry had seen her all holiday. All thought we had all a little party, not a sit-down dinner. She told Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny as they entered the room. Your father and Bill are on their way. Ron, I have sent them both owls, and they are thrilled, she added beamingly. Fred rolled his eyes. Cyrus, Lupin, Tonk, and Kingsley Shacklebolt were already there, and Mad Eye Moody stumped in shortly after Harry had got himself a butterbeer. Oh, Alistair, I'm glad you're here, said Mrs. Weasley brightly, as Mad Eye struggled off his travelling cloak. We have been wanting to ask you for ages. Could you have a look in the writing desk in the drawing room and tell us what's inside it? We haven't wanted to open it just in case it's something really nasty. No problem, Molly. Moody's electric blue eyes swept upward and stared flexibly through the ceiling of the kitchen drawing room. He growled as purple contract desk in the corner. Yeah, I seen it. Yeah, it's a Bogart. Want me to go up and get rid of it, Molly? No, no, no. I'll do it myself later, be Mrs. Weasley. You have your drink. You are having a little bit of a celebration. Actually, she gestured at the scarlet banner. Fourth perfect in the family, she said fondly, ruffling Ron's hair. Perfect? Huh? Growled Moody, his normal eye on Ron and magical eye swirling around gaze into the side of his. Harry had a very uncomfortable feeling it was looking at him and moved away towards Cyrus and Lupin. Well, congratulations, said Moody, still glaring at Ron with his normal eyes, authorized the figure away attract trouble. I suppose Dumbledore think you can withstand most major jinx or he couldn't have protected you. Ron looked rather startled at this view of the matter, but was saved the trouble of responding by the arrival of the father and elder brother. Mrs. Weasley was in such good mood she did not even complain that they had brought Mudunks with them too. He was wearing a long overcoat that seemed oddly lumpy in unlikely place and declined the offer to remove it and put it with Moody's travel cloth. Well, I think a toast in order, said Mrs. Weasley. When everybody had to drink, he raised his goblet to Ron and Hermione. New Gryffindor's perfect. Ron and Hermione beamed as everyone drank to them and them applauded. I was never a perfect myself, said Tonk brightly from behind Harry as everybody moved toward the table to help themselves to food. Her hair was tomato red and waist-length today. She looked like Ginny's older sister. My head of house said I lacked certain necessary qualities. Like what? Said Ginny, who was choosing a baked potato. Like the ability to behave myself, said Tonk. Ginny laughed. Hermione looked as though she did not know whether to smile or not and compromised by taking extra large gulp of bitter beer and cocking on it. What about you, Cyrus? Ginny asked, thumping Hermione on the back. Cyrus, who was right beside Harry, let out his usual bark like laugh. No one would have made me a perfect. I spent too much time in detention with James. Lupin was the good boy. He got the badge. I think Dumbledore might have hoped that I would be able to exercise some control over my best friend, said Lupin. I need scarcely say that I felt dismally. Harry's mood suddenly lifted. His father had not been a perfect either. All at once, party seemed much more enjoyable. He loaded his plate, feeling unusual fond of everyone in the room. Ron was rhapsodizing about his new broom to everybody who would listen. Naughty to 70 in 10 seconds, not bad at it. When you think that Comet 290 is only naughty 260 and that's with decent tailweight according to which broomstick. Harmony was talking very early to Lupin about her view of elf life. I mean, it's the same kind of nonsense as werewolves segregating, isn't it? It's all steam about the horrible thing wizards have to thinking they're superior to the other creature. Mrs. Weasley and Bill were having their usual argument about Bill's hair getting really out of hand and you're so good looking. It would look much better shorter, wouldn't it, Harry? Oh, I don't know, said Harry, slightly alarmed at being asked his opinion. He slid away from them in the direction of Fred and George, who were huddled in the corner with Muddunks. Muddunks stopped talking when he saw Harry, but Fred winked and beckoned Harry closer. It's okay, he told Muddunks, we can trust Harry. He's our financial backer. Look, that Dunk's gotten up, said George, holding out his hand to Harry. It was full of what looked like shriveled backwards. A faint rattle noise was coming from them, even though they were completely stationary. Venom's seed, said George. We need them for the skiving snack boxes, but they are a class. Non-terrible substances we have been having a bit of trouble getting hold of them. 10 gallons. The lot, then Dunk, said Fred. For all the trouble I went to get them, said Mudunks, these saggy, bloodshot eyes stretching even wider. I'm sorry, that's but I'm not taking a nut under 20. Dunks like his little joke, Fred said to Harry. Yeah, his best one so far has been six sickle for the bags of nail quills, said George. Be careful, Harry, want them quickly. Harry, said Fred, Mum's busy pulling over perfect Ron. We are okay, but Moody could have his eyes on you. Harry pointed out. Mudunks looked nervously over his shoulder. What point that? He grunted all night and stand it is if you'll take them quick. There, Harry, said Fred delightedly. That Muddins had impatient these pockets into twins' outstretched hands and scuttered off toward the food. We had better get them upstairs. Harry watched them go, feeling slightly uneasy. It had just occurred to him that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley would want to know how Fred and George were financing their joke shop business when as was inevitable. They finally found out about it, giving their twin his Triwizard winning had seemed a simple thing to do at the time. But what if he led to another family row and a Percy-like estrangement? Would Mrs. Weasley still feel that Harry was as good as her son if she found out he made it possible for Fred and George to start a career she thought quite unstable? Standing where the twin had left them without nothing but a guilty weight of a pit in his stomach for company, Harry caught the sound of his own name, Kingsley Sackbolt, his voice and audible even over the surrounding chatter. Why Dumbledore didn't make Potter a perfect, said Kingsley. He'll have had a reason, replied Lupin, but it wouldn't have shown confidence in him. It's why I had done, persisted Kingsley, especially with the Daily Prophet. Having a go at him every few days. Harry did not look around. He did not want Lupin or Kingsley to know he had heard. He followed Muddunk's back toward the table, though not remotely hungry. His pleasure in party had evaporated as quick as it had come. He wished he were upstairs in bed. Madame Moody was sniffed at the kitchen leg and what remained of his nose. Evidently, he could not detect any trace of poison. Because of that, tore a strip off with his teeth. The handles, made of Spanish oak with anti-jinx varnish and inbuilt vibration control. Ron was saying to Tom. Mrs. Weasley yawned widely. Well, I think I'll sort of out that bogart before I turn in. Arthur, I don't want this lot up too late. All right, night, Harry dear. She left the kitchen. Harry set down his plate and wondered whether he would follow her without attracting attention. You're all right, Potter grunted Moody. You're fine, lied Harry. Moody took a swing from his flask, his electric blue eyes staring sideways at Harry. Come here, I have something that might interest you, he said. From the inner pocket of his robe, Moody pulled a very tattered old Wizardian photograph. Ordinary Order of the Phoenix, growled Moody. Found in last night when I was looking for my spare invisible cloak, seeing as Podmore hasn't had the manner to return my best one. Thought people might like to see it. Harry took the photograph. A small crowded people, some waving at him, others lifting their glasses, looked back at him. There is me, said Moody unnecessarily, pointing at himself. The Moody with the picture was unmistakably, though his hair was slightly less grey and his nose was intact. And there is Dumbledore beside me, Daddles diggling all the other side. That's Marlene McNeil. She was killed 2 weeks after this was taken. They got her whole family, that Frank and Alice Longbottom. Harry's stomach, already uncomfortable, clenched as he looked at Alice Longbottom. He knew her around, finally, friendly face, very well, even though he had never met her because she was the image of her son Neville. Poor devils, groaned Moody, better dead man. What happened? Know them to them, and that's Emmeline Vance. You have met her, and that's their Lupin, obviously. Binge Fenwick, the cocked ate too. We only ever found bite of him. Shift aside there, she added, hooking the picture and the little photographic people its sideways so that those who were partially obscured could move to the front. That's Ager Bones, brother of Amelia Bones. They got him and his family too. He was great wizard. Sturgis Podmore, Blimmy, he looked young, Hadron beaming, vanishing 6 months after this. We never found his body. Hagrid, of course, looked exactly the same as ever. Elfie's dog. You have met him. I had forgotten to use the cure that stupid had eaten it with. It was fine with him, he and his parents, family. The little people in the photograph jostle among themselves and those hidden right at the back paper at the forefront of the picture. That's Dumbledore, brother. Aberforth, only time I ever meet him. Strange block, that's Draco. Dorcas Meadows, Voldemort killed her personally. Cyrus, when he still had short hair, and there you go. Dot. That would interest you. Harry's heart turned over. His mother and father were beaming up at right. sitting on either side of a small, watery eyed man Harry recognized at once as Wormtail. He was the one who had betrayed their whereabouts to Voldemort and so helped bring them their Death Eaters, said Moody. He looked up into Moody's heavily scared and sweet face. Evidently, Moody was under the impression he had just given Harry a bit of treat. Yes, said Harry, attempting to grin again. Listen, I have just remembered I haven't packed my he was spared the trouble of inventing the object he had not packed. Cyrus had just said, "What? That's you have got here, Mad Eye," said Moody, and turned toward him. Harry crossed the kitchen, slipped through the door and up the stair before anyone could call him back. He did not know why he had received such a shock. He had seen his parents' picture before, after all, and he had met Wormtail, but to have them sprung on him like that when he was least expecting it, no one would like that, he thought angrily, and then to see them surrounded by all those other happy faces, Benji, Finwick, who had been found in a Bates, and Guidon Privets, who had died like a hero, and Longbottom, who had been tortured into madness, all waving happily out of the photograph furthermore, not knowing that they were voodoo room. Well, Moody might find that interesting. Harry found it disturbing. Harry tiptoed upstairs in the hall past the stuffed elf head, glad to be on his own again, but he approached the finding landing. He heard noises. Someone snoring in the dining room. "Hello, Harry," said. There was no answer, but the sobbing continued. He climbed the remaining stair, two at a time, walked across the landing and opened the drawing room. Someone was covering against the dark wall, her wand in her hand, her whole body shaking with snow sprawls on the dusky wool carpet in the patch moonlight cleared it. It was Ron. All the air dimmed vanished from Harry's lungs. He felt as though he were falling through the floor. The brain turned icy. Well, Ron did. No, it couldn't be. But wait a moment, it could be. Ron was downstairs. Mrs. Weasley's Harry croaked. Ridiculous. Mrs. Weasley sobbed, pointing her shaking wand at Ron's body cracked. Ron's body turned into Bill, spread eagerly into his bag. His eyes wide open and empty, Mrs. Weasley snapped harder than ever. Ridiculous. She sobbed it again. Crack. Mrs. Weasley's body replaced Bill's. His glass creaked. A trickle of blood down his face. No, Mrs. Weasley moaned. No, ridiculous. Ridiculous. Cracked it, twins. Cracked it, Percy. Cracked it, Harry. Mrs. Weasley, just get out there, shouted Harry, staring down at his own dead body uh, on the floor. Let someone else going on. Lupin had came running into the room, closely followed by Cyrus with Moody stumping along behind him. Lupin looked from Mrs. Weasley to dead Harry on the floor and seemed to understand in an instant. Pulling out his own wand, said very firmly and clearly, "Ridiculous." Harry's body vanished. A silvery orange hung in the air over the spot where he had lain. Lupin waved his wand once more, and the orb vanished in the puff of smoke. "Oh, oh," gulped Mrs. Weasley, and she broke into a storm of crying, her face in her hand. "Molly," said Lupin briefly, walking over to her. "Molly, don't." The second she was sobbing her heart out of Lupin's shoulder. "Molly, it was just Bogart," he said soothingly, patting her on the head. "Just a stupid Bogart. I see them dead all the time." Mrs. Weasley moaned into shoulder. "All the time. Dream about it." Cyrus was staring at a patch of carpet where the Bogarts, pretending to be Harry's body, had lain. Moody was looking at Harry, avoiding his gaze. He had a funny feeling Moody's magical eye had followed him all the way out of the kitchen. "Don't tell Arthur," Mrs. Weasley was glumping now. mopping her eyes frantically with her cuffs. I don't want him to know, being silly. Lupin handed her handkerchief and she blew her nose. Harry, I'm sorry. What must you think of me? She said shakingly, not even able to get rid of Bogart. Don't be stupid, said Harry, trying to smile. I'm just so worried, she said, tears flying out of her eyes. Half family in the order. It will be a miracle if we all come through it. Percy not talking to us. What if something dreadful happened and we had never made up? And what's going to happen if Arthur and I get killed? Who's going to look after Ron and Ginny? Molly, that's enough, said Lupin firmly. This isn't like last time. The order is better prepared. We have got a head start. We know what Voldemort's up to. Mrs. Weasley gave a little squeak of fright at all the sound name. Oh, Molly, come, or it's about time to get used to hearing it. Look, I can promise one's going to get hurt. Nobody can promise that, but we are much better off than we were last time. We weren't in the order then. You don't understand. Last time we were outnumbered 20 to 1 by Death Eaters, and then were picking us off one day. Harry thought of the photograph again, his parents' beaming face. He knew Moody was still watching him. Don't worry about Percy, and Cyrus abruptly. He's come around. It's a matter of a time before Voldemort's move into it the weapon. Once he does, the whole ministry is going to begin us to forgive them, and I'm sure it will be accepting their apology. He added bitterly, as you going to look after Ron and Ginny if you and Arthur died, said Lupin, smiling slightly. What do you think we had to do? Let them starve? Mrs. Weasley smiled tremulously. Being silly, she muttered again, mopping her eyes, but Harry, closing his bedroom door behind him 10 minutes later, could not think Mrs. Weasley silly. He could still see his parent beaming up at him from the tattered old photograph, unaware that their lives, like so many of those around them, were drawing close. Then imagine the Bogart posing as first of member of Mrs. Weasley family, in turn, him flashing before his turn. Without warning, the scar of his forehead scarred with pain again, and his stomach grunt horrible. Get out, he said firmly, rubbing scar pain again. First sight of madness, talking to your own head, said a silly voice from the empty picture on the wall. Harry ignored it. He felt older than he had ever felt in his life, and it seemed extraordinary to him that barely an hour ago he had been worried about a joke shop and who has gotten a perfect scratch. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.